This is Gemara Yevamos Daf Kof Yod Tes. All the learning has been generously sponsored as a schos for the new couple, Yosef ben Chana, Vodelia Bracha Bas Tamar Achaya, Mir Tashem. The learning of the entire Chabura as we're concluding Yevamos should bring them an incredible start to their marriage, and only Bracha Atzlacha and only amazing things. The final few daf, this incredible Masechta, all the learning should bring an incredible schos for Shleim Shel Yosef ben Rafei Shmuel ben Tilon Tzaltzim Bechles L'Cham Basviva, Sar Bluma Bas Mendel Yishuv ben Malka Bashavik Sheikhana Chavlei Basaradina Besoich Sha'ar Chali Yisrael. We pick up and we begin the 16th parak of this long and at times very difficult Masechta. Says the Mishnah, Ha'isha Shahalach Baila Vitzara Salam Dinas Hayam. Continuing the theme of the last few weeks of women whose husbands go overseas, they go overseas, the couple goes overseas, they go with the baby overseas, go without a baby overseas, they go with the brother-in-law overseas. Now the woman is going with her husband and with her co-wife overseas, and they don't have any children yet. Obao, and a woman comes back. Other people come, va'amrula, and they tell her, Meiz Abayalech, your husband died. Loi Tina say the halacha is she's not allowed to get married. V'loi tisyabim, nor can she do yibam. Acheteda shema mu'uberes hi tzarasa. Why? Because it's a tzara. And if the tzara is mu'uberes, if the tzara has a child, then there's no yibam. The whole purpose of yibam, we know all the way back from the last few months of Daf Beis, is to be yokum in the shame of the brother, a husband, to make sure that there's a lineage. But if either she or any of the wives has a child, there's no yibam. So over here, if we know that she and a tzara went overseas, we can't let her to do yibam until we ascertain with certainty or not. We'll see in the Gemara that the tzara does not have any children. Continues the Mishnah, Haisala Chamos. If the woman had a mother-in-law, and again, as we've seen, what's the concern now? Because now the concern is maybe the mother-in-law had a child, and maybe now there's a new yibam that's going to be created. Still says in the Mishnah, she does not have to be concerned that maybe the mother-in-law gave birth, and maybe it was to a boy, and maybe that boy is her husband's brother, thereby creating a chiyuv yibam. That we're not concerned about. Yotzasa Meleya, but let's say the mother-in-law went overseas pregnant, then so says the Gemara, first we hone in on a wording of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that we have to ascertain that maybe Shema Mubares, he Sarasa. Maybe the Tzara is Mi'ubares. Says the Gemara, my he tzarasa. Just say Shema Mubares Sarasa. What does it mean? Shema Mubares he tzarasa. Explains the Gemara, Kamash Malon Laha Tzaru de Chayshinon. Avalatzra Achrita Le Chayshinon. It's honing in on a he, this Sarah. We remember the story? What was the story? She went overseas with a tzara. So that known tzara we have to be concerned about. We don't have to be concerned that maybe there was a different tzara, maybe there's a different co-wife, and maybe that co-wife had a child. That is too far-fetched. So we said in the Mishnah, she can't get married, nor can she do yibam. Explains the Gemara. I understand why she can't do even the Doma Ma'abra. Maybe the co-wife is pregnant. And there's a potential darais. You're playing with fire. Your husband's brother, Ishas Achzin, is a daraisa. But asks the Gemara, hello Tinase, why cannot she marry anyone else in the world? With regard to the Velt, with regard to her marrying anyone else, we should go after the Roiv Nashim Misabrois, the Yaldais. And we should say that most women do indeed become pregnant and do indeed give birth. And therefore, we should be able to assume that when the co-wife is in this world, we know she had a co-wife, we should be able to assume the co-wife had a child. If the co-wife had a child, then what? Then there is no yibum. So when this woman knows that the husband died, why is she not? I understand she can't do yibum, because that's a potential, it's a daraisa. But to marry chutz, to marry anyone else, we should have a roiv teaching us that she's allowed to do that. So it suggests the Gemara, a shita we've seen many times, Lema Rameiri. Perhaps the Mishnah is the Shita of Rameir, the Chayish Lamiuta, that we're worried about the Miyat, the minority. Meaning, even though the majority, the Rav says that the Tsar indeed must have given birth, and therefore this woman can marry anyone else. But no, maybe we have to be concerned for Rameir, for the minority. Explains the Gemara, no, Afilatim Rabban, the Mishnah even be Rabban. Ki Aslin on Rabban and Basaruba. Very difficult concepts we're about to see. When do the Rabbanan say we go after a roiv? Is ruba di isa kaman? Is a roiv that's in front of us? Kigoy. Teisha chanuyos, it's Sanhedrin that we see the stores in front of us. Aval ruba de lesa kaman loves the Rabbanan basa ruba. So says the Gemara, this is a roiv that's not in front of us. This woman, we don't know, is she pregnant? We don't know if she had a child. It's a roiv not in front of us. So the Rabbanan don't go with such a roiv. Says the Gemara, 1 second, Vari Katan, who Ketana the Ruba Leslie, come on. But in the case of Katan and Ketana, that the Gemara will quote us in a moment, is a case of a roiv that's not in front of us. He, Vazi Rabbanan Asa Ruba, and even in such a scenario, the Rabbanan go with the roiv with the majority. The Tani learned in a Braisa, Katan and Ketana, Lo Chatalam Yam Divi Rameir. Rameir says, a Katan and Ketana, in general, a Katan and Ketana never allowed to do Chalitza. Why not? Amr loy the Rameir, the Chacham is at the Rameir. We've seen this already. Yava Amr Shein Chaltzin. I understand you can't do Chalitza. Why not? Ish Ksiv Bebarsha, Umashtin Isha Leish. And we equate a man to a woman, and just like the Ish is a Gadol, so too the Isha has to be a Gedailah. So I understand you can't do Chalitza. Elamata made me Amin. Why can't we let them do Yibam as a Katan? Amr Lahem, Rameir responds, you know why? And again, we've seen this back in Dar Samachay. He says, Rameir, Katan Shamiyim Sasris, Katana Shamiyim Silenis. The whole design of Yibam is to have children. How do you know? Maybe they're not going to be childbearing. Maybe it'll be a Sris and a Silenis. So because of that, Shash, but there's a Paigim Barav, excuse me. So Meir says we're not allowed to let them get married. They can't do Yibam because we don't know. Maybe they're not able to have children. And then it's going to result in an Isser. So what do the Rabbanan respond? And this is the punchline that we're looking for. V'Rabbanan Savri Zel Basaruba the Ketanim. No. Says the Rabbanan, we let the Katan Ketana do Yibam. Why? Because we have a Roiv. V'Roiv Ketanim Lav Srisininu. The majority are not Srisim. Zel Basaruv Ketanis. So asks the Gemara, we see clearly that the Rabbanan who argue on Rameir in general in Shas says we have to always worry about the minority. The Rabbanan says no, we go after Roiv. The Rabbanan holds we go after Roiv even when the Roiv is not in front of us. Even Ruba de Lesa, come on, like this case of the Katan and the Ketana, it's a Roiv in statistics. It's a Roiv that in general we could assume that a Katan and a Ketana will not be a Sris and an islandess. We could assume they should be able to have children. So ask the Gemara, the same thing in our Mishnah. Why don't we assume that this Sarah had a child and therefore this woman should be able to marry anyone else? Says the Gemara, Elamachavarta, Mastisa Rameiri. Says the Gemara, you're right. The Mishnah that disallows this woman from marrying anyone else must be a Rameir that is chayshish and concerned for the minority in all scenarios. Says the Gemara, 1 second, not so fast. But Rameir, about 10 lines to the end of the Amud. Why are you telling me it's Rameir? Aimba Seif. Look at the end of the Mishnah. If there's a mother-in-law, if there's a mother-in-law, then we're not concerned. What would the concern be? Then maybe the mother-in-law had a child. Maybe now there's a new scenario of Yibam. The Mishnah teaches us that we are not worried about. Amai, why not? If we're going, the majority of women give birth. Miat might be lois, and minority have miscarriages. And when they give birth, it's 50-50. So now we have two reasons to say that there wouldn't be no yibum. Number one, that we have that maybe the mother miscarried. Number two, maybe it's an akeva, and therefore, so there's only one out of three reasons that if this mother-in-law gives birth, there's a potential she has a boy, she has a girl, she miscarriages. If it's a boy, there's yibum. If there's a girl, or if it's a miscarriage, there's no yibum. So says the Gemara, 2/3, 60% are saying there's no yibum. 33% sacharim miyuta is saying that there is yibum. So says the Gemara, 1 second, excuse me, incorrect. That was the kasha. So what's the kasha? If we're going with Rameir that we're chayshish for the miuta, so when there's a mother-in-law that could have children, 33%, a miyut of opinions, a miyut of scenarios is teaching us that there will be a new creation of Yibam. And the Mishnah says you're not worried. If the Mishnah tells me we're not worried, it's clearly not going with Rameir that's worried about the miyut. Says the Gemara back, 1 second. Why don't we say that since the This almana, this woman, has a chazaka that's allowed to marry everyone else. So therefore, lo chayish. The Rameir is not going to be worried about a miuta when there's a chazaka. Because in this case, there's a chazaka that this woman, there was no yibum. There's a chazaka that we know the husband had no brothers. So to change a chazaka, Rameir won't do that via miuta. Says the Gemara back, 1 second. Reisha yibum tisyabeim. Fine. That's in the Seifa. But in the first case of the Mishnah, where there is a chazaka of Yibam, there should be Yibam. Why does the Mishnah say that she's not allowed to do Yibam until we make sure that the tzara does not have any children, or yes, has children? Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avua, Reisha the Isser Kareis Chashishu, Seifa the Isser Lav Loi Chashu. Says Rav Nachman Rav Avua, and his interesting answer. They're both Daraisas, as we'll see in a moment. But he's answering in the first case of the Mishnah to do Yibum, Achois Isha. That's a potential Isser Daraisa. But in the Seifa, when we're discussing marrying Luchotz, marrying anyone else, that's an Isser Lav. It's an Isser Lav, it's a Daraisa, but it's only a Lav, it's not a Kares, so over there we're not concerned. But Amar Rava shoots back and says, what? Mechti, Hadaraisa, V'Hadaraisa. They're both Daraisas. Mali is a Kares, Mali is her Lav. Rava's not happy. Amar Rava, says Rava, as we turn over to Kuf Yudesima Beis, Reisha in the first place, Chazaka L'Yibam V'Ruba L'Shuk. So now we get a little bit more complicated. In the first case, again, husband has a brother. They go overseas. There is no children. What's the question? The question is, the tzara, the co-wife, did she give birth? So chazaka liyibam. There's a chazaka that there's yes, ibam. Why? Because no one has children. Veruba l'shuk. And the Rav says that she could go and marry anyone else. So here we're having a clash. The Rav is saying she does not do ibam. The Chazaka is saying she yes to Yibam. The Chazaka loy adiv kiruba. So the Chazaka can't be stronger than the Rov. And therefore, I see miyuta, there may be lois. So the miyot will tip the scale. Or the miyot of cases that the tzara, that the co-wife might have had a miscarriage. Samach lechazaka. We put that together with the chazaka that she can marry everyone else. Palga. And now it's going to be a 50-50. So we're going to have a stalemate, and therefore this woman can neither marry anyone else nor the Yavam. But in the Seifa, in the case of the mother-in-law, Chazaka l'shuk. The chazaka is that the mother-in-law does not have any children. Therefore, the chazaka is there's no yibam. Therefore, the chazaka is she can marry anyone else. Viruba, what does the Rav say? The same thing. L'shuk. If the mother-in-law gave birth to a son, that is a miyuta dimiyuta. It's not just a miyut, a minority. It's a minority of a minority. Or miyuta dimiyuta l'chayish or mayor, and that is the reason why the case in the Seifa is a bit different. Now, of course, the obvious question is, what in the world is the difference between a miyut and a miyuta de miyuta? If we're worried about minority, what's the difference if it's 10%, if it's 20%, if it's 30%? Okay, let's move on. Says the Gemara on Kuf Yudesima Beis, we're 6 lines down, the 2 dots, 7 lines down, lo tinasev lo tisyabim. Again, everyone goes overseas, and we know that the Tsar currently has no children, so we just finished explaining because of this 50 and 50, what do we say? She cannot marry anyone else, nor could she do Yibam. Says the Gemara, Ulaila? Is this a din forever? Until we know for sure whether the Tsar has a child or not, she can't do anything? Amar Zeiri says, Zeiri, no. Le'atzma, for herself, she has to make sure she's not pregnant. Le'chaverta, to ascertain whether the tzara has any children. Tisha, she has to wait 9 months. The cholet says, mimanavshach. After 9 months, if we don't know that there's any children, then she does chalitza. And then whether the tzara have a child or not, even if we didn't hear anything, it's fine. Mimanashach. If the tzara had a kid, she's really allowed to marry anyone else. And if the tzara didn't have a kid, so she does chalitz and everything is fine. That is Zeiri's answer. Rav Chanina Amar says, Rav Chanina la'atzma shashal lechaverta la'oilam. Says more why? V'tichlatz mimanashach. Like we just said, why don't we allow her to do chalitza? And Mimanashach, if the tzara gave birth, she's allowed to marry anyone else. If the tzara didn't give birth, she does chalitza. Says the Gemara, 10 lines down, Abayi bar Avin, Rav Chanina bar Avin, Amri Tarvayu. You know the reason? A gezerah Gezerah that we've seen in the past. Excuse me. Gezerah Shema Yevalad Ben Kayama. Maybe really the tzara gave birth to a son. And now we're going to have to announce that in reality, excuse me, this original woman is allowed to marry a kohen. Because what's the halacha? The halacha is if the tzara gave birth, then there was no potential yibum or chalitza. Why was there no yibum or chalitza? Because there was a child. If there's no yibum or chalitza, then this original woman, what's she allowed to do? Whatever she wants. She allowed to marry a kohen? Yes. She did chalitza? No. She only did chalitza misafik. So explains Abai Rabban or Rabbeinu Barabban, you know what the concern is? We don't want to let her do chalitza. Because then if we find out later on that the tzara had a kid, we're going to have to make a big announcement that this woman's allowed to marry a kohen. Says the Gemara, so make an announcement. So go and announce it. Answers the Gemara, you know, we're concerned. People might have heard that she did chalitza, did not hear about the announcement that the chalitza was in error, and therefore they're going to think that she's not allowed to marry a kohen. Says the Gemara, Tanan, and people are going to think they're permitting a kohen who did, permitting a woman to marry a kohen that did chalitza. Now we continue with the riots. This is exact the detail. A Mishnah that we've seen. Tanan. It was actually yesterday. If a woman goes overseas without any children, she comes back and she said, I had a child. The child died. She's believed. That was the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Why are we not concerned? Maybe Eidim are going to come and say, really, it's not true. Really, you did not need to do any chalitza. And then you're going to have to announce that there was no real chalitza. And you're going to have to announce that she's allowed to marry a kohen. So we see from the previous Mishnah, not like you just said. You just said any time that the chalitza could potentially mess her up, we don't do chalitza. But we see from the previous Mishnah, we let her do chalitza even though there's a concern that maybe it'll be contradiction. And maybe people will think that she's not allowed to marry a kohen. Says Rav Papa, we're talking about a grusha. So what? A grusha, either way, is not allowed to marry her kohen, so it doesn't make a difference. Rav Huna says, no, there's a case where she knows 100%, we were together in the cave, she knows 100% what happened, and therefore there is no concern. And we're going to finish today's shir with the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, we have the wives of two brothers. They come back from overseas. And one said, my husband died, and one said, my husband died. Each one claims their husband was one that died. What's the halacha? Their husbands were brothers. And therefore each one is asur because of the other husband. But what happens? If one had Eidim and one did not have Eidim. So now, as she ish la'edim asura, v'shein la'edim mutares. Lo zu banim, lo zu ein banim. As she ish la'banim mutares, v'shein la'banim asura. Nisyamu. What happens if they were taken in Yibum by a surviving brother, Umesu, Hayavamim, and then the Yevamim die without children? Asura is the Yanase, they are not allowed to get remarried. Rav Lazar Maholva Hotur Yevamim, Hotur L'chol Ha'olam. Says Rav Lazar, because we allowed them to marry Yevamim, they were allowed them to marry everyone. Before we call it a day, let's take one moment to look at Rashi. Rashi over here says, Shtei Yevamos. And Rashi points out, like we said, it's Nishi Shnei Achen, married to two brothers. Zu Asur L'Shokmim Ne'bai L'Shel Zu, Shehu Yevama, because we have a case of Yibam. The Shema Chayu, because we don't know, maybe he's alive, who's Kukalu, and therefore we have Yibam. V'yav Al B'Sheish Toy Meres Meis, what do you mean? This is the case, the first case. The wife said that the husband died. As we've seen, she not believes the Yevama, Shatinase Alpia, to allow them to do Yibam on her word. Shein Yevama Mi'ida one Yavam cannot give edus for a friend. As we've seen, that's one of the 5 women not to give edus about is for the Yavam. And that's the reason why, even though each one is ostensibly believed about themselves, they're not believed about the other one who has a potential Yibam. I'll pick it up from the Gemara in the next year of Siyata D'Shmai.